Hello, everyone. Welcome to SCV Means Business, the podcast of the Santa Clarita Valley Economic Development Corporation. I'm your host, Holly Schroeder, and today my guest is Dr. Mark Schniepp, founder of the California Economic Forecast, and serves as our expert economist. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining me today.
Okay, thanks, Holly. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Mark, you've done a lot of work in the Santa Clarita Valley for many, many years, and just earlier this month we had our annual Economic Outlook Conference, and at that conference, and the research book that you put together for us really includes a forecast for the Santa Clarita Valley. So maybe we'll just start there and we'll go to some other topics, but where would you say the Santa Clarita Valley is in terms of its recovery from the pandemic-induced recession, and what would you say kind of is the state of affairs right now?
Okay, well, the region is certainly more than halfway towards its recovery, and when we talk about recovery, I mean, where can it be? Where is it now relative to where it was when the pandemic hit? Because as we all know, economic activity was just shattered at that time, and we've tried to come back from the depths of that calamity, which was April and May of 2020. So Santa Clarita Valley is probably around 55 to 60% back now in terms of recovering a lot of the employment that didn't make it. And in other areas, it's almost all the way back, such as in the city's sales tax receipts. So everybody's spending again, and we're seeing a lot of retail sales and things like that. And visitation is coming back, particularly, well, almost entirely from domestic California visitors right now. And then, of course, we're seeing housing, which was never affected. So that's doing very well. That's really one of the engines of growth in the valley. And then new housing production was really never affected except for maybe 1 month. And that is at its highest level in terms of new homes being permitted and starting up since the great bubble days of the first decade of the new century here. So things are definitely dynamic. There's a lot of momentum, and we figure that by mid-2022 we should be completely restored.
So it looks like most of the indicators are very positive, and it's the jobs recovery that's lagging a little bit, and that has to be helped by the reopening of Magic Mountain and Princess getting back to cruising. They just had another set of ships that went in the water, which is great news. So how do those large employers affect our recovery, and what's sort of the makeup of the jobs that we haven't restored yet?
Well, when Magic Mountain and Hurricane Harbor opened up again, which was in April, that produced a real noticeable jump start in a lot of the jobs that, of course, had been lost. And so, and then, of course, there was so much additional travel coming into the region that we saw also an uptick in hotel motel stays as well, and just food services and all those attendant industries. So that was a big deal to see Six Flags reopened and all the attendant economic activity that surrounds that. Now we haven't yet seen any impact yet, although you're right, it's right around the corner, from Princess Cruises restoring their business, but that's all going to happen over the next few months. In fact, they claim, they've indicated that they'll have almost their entire fleet operational by next spring again, because demand for cruise ships is just surged. So we look for that to start recovering very quickly and be fully restored by next spring, which leads us to proclaim that almost the entire labor market recovery should be complete by mid 2022.
We're
Manufacturing
home.
still is an
Yeah.
issue, but then again, we're seeing that all over the state. It's not unique to Santa Clarita Valley, so a lot of the manufacturers have not restored employment, and so we're waiting to see how that ensues over time. But we really believe that a lot of automation has replaced a lot of the labor in the manufacturing industries, particularly those that are in Santa Clarita Valley and in Los Angeles County. So I don't know that we're going to see full restoration by next year.
Yeah, so I mean, we're home to a lot of, aerospace, and of course, commercial aerospace was pretty decimated and still hasn't fully recovered. I mean, do you see that as people start traveling more, that is going to kick up the amount of manufacturing, or is automation taken such a hold in some of those sectors that it's never going to get back to where the employment levels were?
Well, when you look at the trend that was occurring in the Santa Clarita Valley, and for that matter, for most of California, even pre-pandemic, there was, an overall general and gradual subtle decline overall in employment. So yes, automation has definitely taken over that industry, and we're seeing a lot more capital intensivity in manufacturing, which is replacing workers. So we don't believe it will really ever come back here in the short run to where it was, say, back in 2018, back in 2017. So look for that to continue to, dissolve a little bit in LA County and Southern California, for that matter. But that still doesn't mean that output will be high. And you're right, as commercial airlines come back, you may see an uptick overall in that. And we're seeing that certainly come back with domestic passengers. We need to get international tourism going in California again. And the Biden administration now just allowed the Europeans to come back in starting November 1st. So that's going to help. That's going to help tourism. China, no, that hasn't happened yet. So when that does occur next year, yeah, look for a much bigger surge overall in tourism in California, and a lot more commercial aviation occurring.
You mentioned the residential real estate market, and you'd have to be under a rock to not know that there's been a huge increase in prices, and now we have new construction happening. What about the other real estate sectors? What's happening in retail and office and industrial? What do you see happening in those sectors?
Yeah, you'd think that retail would be sort of in the dumps right now, but it's not. It's come back in a big way because of the type of retail that is going into a lot of the shopping centers and strip malls and things like that. So vacancy rates for retail real estate are not really that high. They're in the 5 to 6% range, which is just slightly above normal. So it's amazing how much the retail real estate market has recovered and has reinstated a lot of its stores. So, and I don't look for that really to change all that much. There has been sort of a longer term malaise in the retail industry because, of course, all the online and e-commerce sales that have substituted in. But we're seeing different types of retail. So I'm really optimistic about the retail market. And I think that you'll see utilization pick back up in Santa Clarita Valley and all throughout California. So that doesn't really worry me. Industrial has been very strong. It really never ticked down much. The only reason we saw occupancy rates go up a little bit is because of a lot of the new space that came online, but all that's getting absorbed right now, and the industrial sector is extremely healthy, not only in the region, but throughout the state. The office market, I think vacancy rates went from about 9 or 10 pre-pandemic to 13 or 14% now. So there was a softening, needless to say, in the office market. A lot of people were working from home. A lot of businesses gave up some of their office space, so there was some downsizing. But for the most part, we don't look for a long-term major change in office utilization. In fact, most of the surveys that we see now being done show that office using companies are going to hold on to most of their space, if not bring on more space. The work
Really?
from home phenomena, we believe, is mostly just temporary. I mean, some of that will continue to occur, but for the most part, office settings need to have employees, in the office, at least part-time, for collaboration, for networking, for team building, for mentoring, for all of these things. So we don't look for a big change in the office market, and we look for that to continue to see its health restored over the next 18 months.
Do you think the hybrid model will, take hold, and does that affect, you don't think that affects utilization of space very much?
No, I don't. And as I mentioned the surveys. When you look at some of the surveys that are being done by office people that of course lease office space, there's actually more of them indicating that they will be wanting to lease more office space than they had before. And again, I think what they're going to do is change the way that they utilize their offices to make them a little bit more conducive to the people that are hybrid and that will be coming in, spacing things out a little bit more, making more conference space for team building and collaboration. So no, I don't think work from home is really going to collapse the demand for office space. And I think there's been a lot said about that. I think a lot of it is rhetoric because we have a tight labor market. But for the most part, I think that's going to continue to be just what it was pre-pandemic for the most part.
So you mentioned in the industrial new buildings coming online. We certainly have had a lot of that here. We also have new office and retail coming online. So what's the effect of new development, and residential too, obviously? What's the effect of new development on our job prospects and our recovery? It's pretty intertwined. So you think that puts us ahead of other areas in Southern California, or keeps us even? What's your take on that?
Yes, we monitor a new development throughout the state, and there's no doubt that those areas that have a lot more going on with regarding new construction of residential infrastructure or of new office or industrial are faster growing. They create more jobs. They migrate more population. More people come in, then they spend more, and that starts the multiplier process, and the economies just do much better growth-wise. So the more new development, the bigger the engine of growth for the region, and the greater job creation, the greater income creation, and the greater overall economic growth.
It's good. So it doesn't sound like we know we're short on industrial. The retail apocalypse is not imminent, and you think office is recovering. So that's pretty good, restabilizing back to pre-pandemic behaviors to a large extent.
Right. The other thing about new development, new residential development, is that you do bring in more populations. More of the workforce is now resident locally. They're spending more, so you need more retail. So while at the same time you have more e-commerce, you've got larger populations that are demanding more physically on site retail services and retail goods. So your retail industry is not going to go away anytime soon.
Is there a shift in the type of retail? Is it moving more towards services and experiences, going to restaurants and those types versus going in somewhere and buying a sweater? or is that not is it not a meaningful enough shift to really detect it in the data at this point?
No, you can detect it in many places. So it is more experiential, as you indicated. It's more entertainment. There are more different types of gym alternatives, workout alternatives that are going into strip centers and even larger malls. Even offices are now starting to utilize retail space. And then you got just so many more amusement and entertainment type of alternatives going into the retail environment, many more services too. So that is changing. We are detecting that throughout, the nation, certainly occurring in California. So look for that to occur, but it's not going to be the case that retail real estate is going to shutter up anytime soon.
So you mentioned the national. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the national economy, because there's so many trends that are, influencing what's happening. How worried are you about inflation?
Well, I am worried about it. I think that most of the inflation that we're seeing now is temporary. It's not going to last, be persistent into, say, 2023. I think inflation is with us for the next year. We have higher gasoline prices. We have higher food prices. We're going to have higher goods prices overall because of all the supply disruptions that occurred with the pandemic. They're still occurring. We still have a lot of container ships that are just sitting out in San Pedro Bay waiting to come in and unload, and that's creating all kinds of delays. Consumers are still demanding a lot of those products. It's driving up the prices. The prices for containers to actually use them has tripled, quadrupled, quintupled, and that's going to get into the price of goods. So until all the supply issues work themselves out, and we believe that won't occur entirely until the end of next year, we're going to have a higher price scenario with us. So I'm worried a little bit about that. But again, as supply works itself out, you'll see a lot of the high prices right now come down. I don't know about energy. I think that's going to stay up there, oil prices. So that's probably not going to change, but consumer goods will ultimately start to, in general, go down.
And so is that purely because of supply chain disruptions? What's been the role of some of the stimulus? Obviously, there's been a lot of efforts, especially early on, to make sure that capital could flow and that we didn't seize up all of the markets. I mean, how do those pieces come together, and what's your outlook on?
Well, you're right. The stimulus, all the stimulus dollars, which manifested mostly into major payments to cities and counties and municipalities. It also manifested into huge unemployment subsidies from the federal sources for people unemployed. In fact, it gave them probably more money in many cases than they were earning in their job. So that flooded the system, along with all the helicopter money that we all got, or many of us got, just with the direct payments. That flooded the system with income and therefore demand for products. And with all the supply issues, they weren't able to catch up to the demand, and therefore that's what's created inflation. We had demand greater than supply, and of course that drives up price. And so we've seen that over the last 6 months, and we'll probably continue to see it over the next 6 months. But the stimulus goes away, hopefully. We won't see any more. And so again, that's temporary. We'll start getting back to normal with regard to our income growth and with our spending growth. So yes, stimulus has helped to create all the inflation along with the supply disruptions, but again, those should largely be alleviated after 2022.
So after 2022, so it's going to take a year, you think, for that to
Yeah.
to work through. And the stimulus payments and the extended unemployment largely wrapped up earlier in this month in September. So how long does that take? You think it takes till the end of 2022 for that to really help us loosen the labor markets? Every company I talk to is looking for workers.
Right. The labor markets are not going to loosen up very quickly. They will start to loosen up, particularly as a lot of the subsidies go away, and most of them have now ended. I think a few, even if some states linger on into October, but for the most part, they're largely over. That help, and people will start to go back to work. They'll come into the labor force because we've had a major labor force problem getting people to come back to work. That, along with the fact that schools are now opening, and so all of the caretakers, i.e., mostly stay-at-home moms, can now get back into the labor force, and so that's going to jumpstart labor force, make a lot more people available to work. The other side of that is that we've seen a lot of the baby boom generation retire. There was a surge in retirements. I don't know that they're going to be coming back. So we're going to see if that has been an issue and if that will affect labor force participation going forward. So there's still some unknowns, still some uncertainty. All the income will slowly drain out of the system. It'll be used up in new demand and, of course, the higher prices. But it'll take a while for that to change. It'll take a while for the supply issues to work themselves out, for container ships and other freight ships to start to come back online, and the delivery schedules to be restored so that we don't have these delays and these supply shortages. So, yeah, it's going to take longer than just overnight. Again, by the end of 2022, going into 2023, we see things being almost fully restored in almost all respects by 2023.
You mentioned the impact of retirements and caretakers. I mean, it's something like we've lost 1 million to 2 million women out of the workforce, I think, and obviously the retirement. So what's the demographic trend? But we also have another generation that's coming up that is larger, I think, than the baby boomers. So are demographics on our side in this recovery? And you can speak to that either, the national level or the state, local level, whichever you think is most pertinent.
Yeah, well, they're kind of moving in the same direction, so it's not like it's a different story. We've got the largest graduating classes from college and universities in the history of the data coming. That's Generation Z. And so thank God we've got a big labor force potential coming over the next several years that will slowly and gradually, untighten the current labor market. That, along with automation that we're seeing, and the onset of robots, autonomous vehicles, and everything else that will be significantly labor saving. So the demographics are kind of on our side there. Boomers are retiring, though, in big numbers, although not as large as was predicted. And why is that the case? Simply because they're living longer, they want to work, and they kind of have to work because boomers didn't save enough. So they don't have the wherewithal to maintain their lifestyles with their current retirement savings. So it looks to me like, many boomers are going to be working into their 70s, and so that's going to slow down the rate of retirement, which should keep the labor force, protected here, and it won't. We won't lose it so quickly. So I think we're safe over the next 10 years.
So it sounds like demographics are on our side. You don't think that we're having a real estate apocalypse. Our labor market is coming back probably by mid-year in Santa Clarita Valley, and end of year for the rest of the state and country. So for the shock that we went through, and as challenging and devastating as it was to so many businesses, the outlook right now for those who survived, it sounds like it sounds okay.
Yeah, it is okay. And again, we really don't see any major imbalances going forward. So businesses should be quite optimistic about their future over the next 4 or 5 years because, again, world demand is going to recover, and things we don't see an imbalance in any economic criteria, any economic indicators going forward. If anything, we're going to get a lot more technology and automation occur within businesses. We're going to see greater world demand overall. So, no, again, over the next several years, I don't see anything really getting in the way, not economically anyway, or demographically. Certainly, we're in a period of time in which there's a lot of contentiousness politically, so hopefully that won't manifest into any surprises, and we can work through those issues.
Before the pandemic, we'd been in a economic expansion for, close to a decade or so, and everybody was sort of wondering when the shoe was going to drop and something was going to change. And then the shoe dropped big time when we had, so many business shutdowns as a result of the pandemic. It's almost like it sort of sussed everything out of the, the bad. I guess, those of us that, as we lived it, it seemed so hard to believe what was happening. But in the end, once you've survived it, and obviously a lot of businesses didn't, but if you did survive it, the outlook is we're back to sort of a rosy outlook.
That's
Is that
right.
a fair characterization?
Yeah, it was. So when you have a major recession like that, and an episodic, essentially, collapse of business, a lot of the businesses that were just marginal during the expansion, that were hanging on, they get cleaned out really quickly. So you do have a cleansing process that you're alluding to here. And so we did lose a lot of businesses that were marginal in a very expansionary economy. And that's what we should have been worrying about back then before the pandemic. Now we don't have to worry about them so much because they're essentially gone, or they've merged, or whatever the case may be. So going forward, we have just the most healthiest firms that have basically survived and are moving ahead. And so that's going to help us in the strength of the economy over the next several years.
Well, really great conversation, Mark. Let's hope a lot of those healthy companies find their way to the Santa Clarita Valley. That's what we like to see. And we always enjoy, what we can do to keep those companies strong. And I always enjoy talking with you and hearing more about your thoughts on this. So I want to thank you for being here and let everybody know that you can, learn about our Outlook conference, which we hold once a year, by going to scvedc.org/outlook, and can always get information from Dr. Schniepp on as we have more information coming out in our research report, etc. So thanks, Mark, for being here. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Holly. Glad to be here.
Great. And thanks, everybody, for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're now on YouTube as well. So for more information, you can check that out at scvedc.org/podcast. Thanks for being here, and we'll meet you next time on SCV Means Business.